On today's episode of Young Leaders in Tech, we have Lorcan Nyhan with us. Lorcan oversees the development and delivery of training with the Communications Clinic. He delivers courses in speech writing, media skills, including broadcasting, interview preparation, and presentation skills. He also heads the Careers Division and is a columnist with the Sunday Independent. Welcome to the show, Lorcan.
Thanks very much for having me, John.
No worries. Thanks. So today we're going to be talking all about careers. We're going to talk about how you go about changing your job or even your career itself to a different industry, maybe promotions, moving companies. And if we have time, we'll go through some interview prep and some useful information around that. So before we get started, Lorcan, can you just give me a bit of background on yourself and your expertise in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, I'm the head of training with the Communications Clinic, and that involves overseeing the Careers Division as well. So, I wear a couple of different hats at various different stages, but the one that's most relevant to what we're talking about today, rather than the communications training, the media, the writing, the Sunday Independent stuff that I do, is careers training, careers development for people. So for the last 7 years, I would have been prepping people for job interviews on a consistent basis, be they grads going in for their first job, or be they, CEOs going for the CEO position initially. And part and parcel with that is helping people plan their careers and think about their careers. So I wouldn't call myself a career coach in that way, but when you link in, you help people prepare, and also you're helping people with executive coaching. That all involves, hang on, where are you going with your career? What's the next best step? How do you get there? How do you build the relationships? How do you get ready so that when you walk into the interview, you've got something to say? Because you have people come to me a fair bit saying, geez, I have this problem for the interview. And it's like, well, we're not going to fix it in 5 days. That takes a year and a half to fix. So that morphs itself into long-term career development as well. So I could describe myself in loads of different ways, but for this, I help people prepare for job interviews.
Perfect. That sounds good. So we'll dig straight into it and with a bit of a humdinger. So a lot of people at the moment may be thinking of a change in path of their career for one reason or another, apart from the obvious at the moment is like lack of available opportunities or maybe perhaps an aging industry. How does one know when it's time to move on to new pastures?
When you've stopped learning, you've stopped developing, and if you do genuinely feel like you're stuck doing the same thing again and again and again. So for me, that's when people it can be a bit scary. You might not always want to go. You might think, geez, this was the job that I always thought I'd be in. But when you get to the point where you're not doing anything new, you're not developing, and you've exhausted the internal possibilities for changing the role internally or for finding ways to develop, then you probably should be thinking about either moving on, moving sideways, whatever it might be. So sometimes people get itchy feet. That's not the same as you definitely should leave. Sometimes I think there's internal opportunities. You just need to ask for, sit down with people, talk to somebody, say, geez, I want to flex that area of my brain for a while. But if you've tried all of that and still feel, you know what, it's time to go, well, then you should start proactively looking.
Yeah. And so then that leads on to, if you know you want to make the change, if you made up that decision that your time is up, but you're unsure of what to do or what career you'd like to change to, what can you do to find out?
There's a lot of different things that you can do at that stage. The first thing, and I think it's particularly effective in an Irish context, is just start reaching out to people and asking for coffees. Now it might be Zoom coffees. Hopefully at some point it will be real coffees. Reach out to people and talk to them. Have a think about the areas you might want to work in. Find somebody who works in that area. Find a few people and ask them for a coffee. In general, people are sound. People are happy to meet you. We just don't reach out enough. So for me, that's the first key thing to do. The second one would be, I think it can be useful sometimes to look at the kind of companies that you think you'd like. So you might not be fully sure on the role you'd like, but look at the kind of company that you would like and look into it and say, hang on, there might be roles here that I would actually really, really enjoy that I didn't think would be for me or I didn't think would be open to me. So if you know the area, reach out to people. If you don't, look at a company and reach out there. And I suppose the third thing would be, if you see somebody who you admire, who you think, geez, how did they get to where they are? If you know them from the media, if you know them as a family friend, if you just know them from them being experts in their area, and go backwards through their career and say, hang on, how did I get there? Because a lot of the time there was a leap at some stage into the unknown. But even if there wasn't, you can go back 2 or 3 paces and say, well, geez, there's a path that I didn't know was a path. So reach out to people, look at companies, and then find people you admire and work backwards. I think are newer, well, not even newer, but maybe more left field ways of finding out what you want to do other than just scrolling through the job ads. Which is
so that'd the example of my kind of career path at the moment, I started off with customer support and then kind of moved up through the customer support levels and then became a product manager for the same company I'm in. So that's the kind of, when people ask me, I'd like to get into Microsoft, or I'd like to get into one of those big companies that have all these good benefits like kids coming or something like that, start on the support line of things, or start on somewhere where you have the skills and try to work from there.
Absolutely. Every major company consistently looks internally to bring people through and has development paths. So I think sometimes we think, particularly when we're moving, that we need to move and go into the ideal role, or we need to go, here's where I want to be, and what can I do in the next year to get there? Well, sometimes what you need to do is you need to move sideways a little bit so you can start developing the skills you need to then move upwards again. So you need to be a little bit smart and strategic about it as well. I'm not big into 3 years and 5 years planning, that horrible interview question of where will you be in 5 years. But there's an element of, hang on, where do I want to be? And then work backwards and say, what skills do I need to get there? And if you have those skills, go straight for it. If you don't just kind of throw your hands in the air and say, geez, I don't have them, or geez, it's so unfair, I can't get those skills. Work out a way to get them, work your way around. It might take you 2 years, but geez, life is long. And you can work your way around. And look, people get into various different careers in a whole wide variety of career paths. The world isn't linear anymore, the way it used to be.
So if then you found out what career you would like to be in, how do you know, or how do you find out if that company that you're looking at, or that industry, or how that's right for you? Has it the right culture, or that kind of thing? How do you go about that?
I'm going back to some of my previous advice. You have to talk to people. Like it's because you can read all you want, and look, it's useful to read up on things, look at the various, the Glassdoor, etc., and get a feel there, see how they describe themselves, see how the executives that talks describe themselves. You can get a good feel that way, but you're never going to get a better insight than sitting down with somebody for 20 minutes on a call or of a chat and just say, what's it like? Do they live up to those values? Do they live up to those cultures? Jay, is there any example you could give me? You just have to get in front and talk to people. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. Reaching out and pinging a connection on LinkedIn, or finding their email address and sending it. You feel a bit, geez, am I being a bit keen here? Am I being a bit eager? But those who are being keen and eager are going to get ahead. So you don't plague people. You don't, fire out 40 generic messages to loads of people. You take your time, you tailor a message, you explain why you're reaching out to them, you do it in a sound way, and people will react to that, and they're very likely. So I think for me, that's one of the best ways to get an insight to it. But you need to work out what you like as well, and what you actually value rather than what you think you should value. Yeah,
and then how do you figure out if you're qualified enough for the career you want to go into, or if you have the skills required for those jobs?
Yeah, again, I can only be kind of generalist on this without a specific person in front of me saying, do I have the right skills? But I'll be generalist for a while. You need to look at the spec. You need to have a feel for what do they really need in this role, and do you have enough of the skills that they're looking for? So there are some people who will look at a spec and they'll see 20 things on it, and they have 19 of them, and they don't have the 20th. And they say, well, geez, I can't get that job, so because I don't have all of the skills. But nobody sits down writing a job spec and says, well, it's binary, all 20 or none. They put down a list of things because they're hoping they'll get 10 or 12. So I'm saying, don't talk yourself out of a role if you feel you have the core skills. Some of them are just essential criteria. If they need you to speak Chinese and you can't speak Chinese, don't waste everybody's time by going for the job. There are certain things that are just essential criteria, and if you don't have them, go develop them. Then there are other things where it might just be a different term on it. It might be extensive project management skills, but they might not need lean qualifications, and you might not think you've project management skills, but you've ran a team. You've got great organizational skills, and you've got good communication skills, which means you do have good project management skills for what they might be looking for if it's not like essential qualifications in project management. So think with a bit of common sense, and I don't mean that disparagingly. I just think it's that element of, hang on, don't psych yourself out of it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Have a think of, what's the job? Forget about what they wrote down. What's the gig? What would I be doing day to day? Can I do it? And do I have any examples of me doing it before? And then you have the skills, even if you don't have the terminology for those skills. But if you're missing something, go fill the gap. Yeah. Don't wait for your employer to come to you and give you the perfect project. spend
A
6 months
certain
asking for.
amount of it, like, is it's kind of, why not? Why wouldn't you apply for it if there's no loss to you? Like, you might as well if you have some of
Well,
them.
absolutely. And I think there is an element of why not me? Like give it the go. And I mean, as long as you do it correctly, and as long as you aren't scattergun in your approach, a good cover letter and a good email in, good CV doesn't take a massive amount of time if you know what you're doing and you're doing it correctly. And if it's something you really want, well, then put in the time. There's nothing worse than half doing it, though. There's nothing worse than you get bored in work one day, or you had a long day and it's 10:30 or 11, you come back and say, geez, I look at a couple of jobs and I'll ping off a few emails, or I'll send in my CV, but you don't tailor it properly. You don't write the cover letter. And then that's really disheartening because you're not getting anywhere, but it's because you're not doing it properly. So if you're doing it, do it correctly, tailor it to the person, and, make it a structured job for a while.
Yeah. So a lot of people then might be thinking, I'm pretty happy in my role right now, but there might not be any like upwards career progression. But what can you talk to the importance of changing careers in your normal job?
I think continual development to new experiences is important. I think gaining new things. I don't want to say it's all about the next interview, because it's not. But I think it's a nice framing and mindset technique for people of, if in a year you haven't gained anything new that in an interview you'd be really excited to talk about, or an example you could give across, saying, geez, well, over the last 6 months I've been working on this. If it's just the same example you could have given a year ago, that to me is a sign that you're gone a bit stale. I would also tell people to keep a fluid CV. You should be updating your CV every couple of months with your new achievements so that you have them to hand. If you do that 2 or 3 times and there's nothing to write down, you're probably gone a bit stale because you're just gone into a day-to-day flow. Now, I think if you hit both of those criteria, can update your achievements and have new experiences to talk about, and you're in the same role, or you're in the same company, or you're just doing different aspects, there's nothing wrong with that. There's a perception you have to change as well, have to jump around a new company every 3 years. I don't agree with that at all. But I do think you need to be developing new achievements, new experiences. Sometimes that's about your own initiative internally, building your network across internally in the company, asking for new opportunities, jumping onto the various different cross-departmental task forces that a lot of companies have, and pushing yourself. But if there's a ceiling ahead of you and you can't answer those questions internally, then you look to move. And then it's really important to move because you need to be growing.
Yeah. So moving from the why more to the kind of a how now. So like, a lot of people might think a career change means changing their company or taking a career break to maybe go back, study something else in college or in school, but that's not necessarily the case. So you mentioned earlier, like, you can move around in the company. Are there ways to change your career in the company you're currently in, and how do you go about that?
There absolutely are, and I think, look, the first step to all of it is no different to how you would change your career externally over an extended period of time, other than just applying for jobs. It's build your network, and build your network in a strategic, effective way internally in your organization over a 6-12 month period. That, again, we tend to interact with people that we happen to come across internally on a reactive basis. So I'm working on a project with them, and therefore I build a relationship with them, rather than stepping back and saying, hang on, what are the relationships in this company, if I'm to grow and companies want to retain you, so they want you to grow, that I'd like to have? What's a department I'd like to work in? What's a person even that I'd like to work for because they're very impressive? And how do I go about building my relationship with that person? So you have to build and expand out your network and build strong relationships internally. And I can talk to how to do that as we go through if you'd like. But internally, that's one of the areas that I would look at. I think as well that people undervalue the importance of non-career related development. So that if you do feel like you're not getting new experiences, that you do like your job, you like your team, you do feel that there's a potential in that company, but you just feel a bit stale at the moment, there are ways outside of work to develop your skill set. Whatever your interests are, you can start a podcast. Do you know, like, you can do that. You can get involved in acting. You can get involved in coaching. You can get involved in volunteering and working within a charity. That's all relevant stuff that flexes different muscles, that keeps you engaged, that can be useful and can open up opportunities that you didn't think were possible. Sometimes we get stuck in a path and feel we have to keep going down that way. One of the ways to get out of that path is to, in your spare time, do new things, push yourself a little bit. So I think that's relevant as well.
Yeah, we've had a couple of speakers on the meetups before where they were saying that they, one guy, he watched some random off the ball topic on YouTube once a week. So he knows how hip surgery is done now, stuff like this, just completely off the ball conversations that he can have with people. That's kind of piqued his interest for different areas. Another lad said he trains to pretty much expertise in something new every year. So I think it was archery a couple of years back, and then like canoeing or something like that. So they're saying that that's ways to keep their mental health kind of in shape and to keep on top of their own kind of personal development. So that's one way.
Yeah, and I think that makes absolutely perfect sense. And I think, look, also, I mean, the online world exists now. Going back to college, retraining is brilliant. But if you just want to hone up on some skills or want to learn new skills, there's ways to do it while you're working without going back to college consistently. If you want to get a new technical skill, there's ways of doing it. If you want to improve your communication skills, there's ways of doing it. There's ways of actually learning most things now with a bit of time and dedication and a bit of structure. And I'm going to sound really kind of old school and boring here as well, but just read books, always read books with a pen and dog ear and go back and reread them again. Like you can learn to make yourself more interested and more engaged consistently by reading outside of your comfort zone as well. So no different than looking at the random YouTube videos. Read random books. You can learn a lot very quickly by reading well-written, engaging books by experts.
What are you reading at the moment?
I am, because of I write a column for the Sunday Independent, and it's on US politics and try and analyze that from a communications perspective every couple of weeks. So I'm reading a lot about US politics at the moment. There's a 4-volume, to be a 5-volume at some stage, a series on Lyndon Johnson. So I'm in the middle of the 4th volume of that at the moment. So if you ever want to know what his great-grandparents did in Texas, I can let you know. So I'm reading that at the moment. And then there's an excellent book called Behave that I've just finished as well that I think everybody should read. It's a very interesting book.
Cool. So when people are considering different roles, I don't know, they might, for some reason, feel guilty about thinking about moving job or changing positions, and they might not let their managers know. Maybe they might think that the manager will frown upon it, or they're not going to be happy that, I'm going to lose this employee, I don't want to help them out. But for me, it's not the case. When I was working MasterCard about 2 years, when I told one of the product managers that I would be, if a role opened up in our team under product, that I'd be interested. It did open up about a year later. He remembered that I had asked him and said, was I still interested? And of course I was. And then I got the job and I moved into product from support after 5 years in support with no experience in product, basically. So that's how can people kind of get over this and broach the subject with their manager if they're nervous or they're worried that it might have negative consequences?
Yeah, I think for the most part, people will know their own managers, and there will be some people who maybe you can have that conversation with. But I think for the most part, managers, when they have a team, genuinely want their team to be happy, generally want them to develop, want their career to progress. I think that's the starting point for most people. I think if people think about it that way, that, geez, I don't want to talk to my manager about it. I'd like to stay, but God, it'd be awkward if I said, or they might be annoyed at me. Fast forward 6 months when you have to go to the manager and say, I've taken a job somewhere else and I'm gone. You're going to have that awkward conversation anyway. So should you not have it 6 months in advance when it's really positive, when it's saying, look, I really like it here. I like what I'm doing, but I feel a little bit stale. I'm looking for new opportunities. I've seen this one externally, but have you any advice for me? And geez, there might be a path inside that you didn't know existed. They might take an interest in it. They might not, but they might. So if you get on well with your manager and you're worried about offending them, well, you're going to have an awkward conversation in 6 months' time. So why not have a less awkward one now? Open up the conversation. And in general, if they want to keep you, they might find a way to keep you. If you go to them with an ultimatum of saying, I have this other job, can you keep me? That's a harsher reality for them, and they're more likely to react to that reality harsher. Yeah. So have the conversation early, absolutely.
So which is hard to do now. Yeah, it is. Yeah, over the Zoom call or.
Yeah, it formalizes communication in a way that is useful in some ways, but is much more difficult in other ways, particularly for the manager, for the leader. It's very, very difficult because you can't have impromptu conversations. You can't be working on a project and have a coffee afterwards and get a feel. So it makes everything more formal, which for those chats almost will make it feel like a bit of a review, but you just need to try to not let that temperature take hold.
what I'm finding it a bit more difficult is to build your own personal network with the people that you wouldn't necessarily work under in the same company. That's one thing I'm struggling with. Do you have any recommendations for how you can do that?
Yeah, it is. It is just much more difficult. That there's some of these things that are just more difficult. Now, I've worked with some people, and I thought they had an interesting perspective on it, where we were having a conversation like this, and what they actually said was, for newer relationships that they do naturally have to engage with in the workplace, they've actually found the relationships build much quicker and much stronger because you're in people's living rooms. So you end up talking about the kids because they've jumped in on the call in a way you normally never would. I'd say work with them for 30 years and never talk about family. So they've actually said that if you think about it that way, you can actually strengthen relationships quicker. But yeah, they're people you're naturally interacting with. In general, and I think it still applies to what we're talking about here, the way to build long-term relationships is to act in a proactive way with no self-interest that is apparent whatsoever. So that you're consistently saying, how can I add value out of nowhere for these people? They mentioned 2 months ago, I remember, that they are interested in US politics. Jays, here's an article, and you ping it on to them. Or you're working on a project and you're designing something that you think could be useful to that team. You just send it off with no ask for a coffee, no question. You just send it off. So the way to build relationships is that outside of your self-interest. And that can be as simple as send an email, or it can be more substantial, because the credit you get for something that you weren't asked to do or wasn't your job to do is exponentially higher than it is for something that's reactive. You could work for 45 hours on something for somebody, and if you were put on that job, the relationship points you get for that are minimal. You could spend 2 hours putting something together and it comes out of the blue. You didn't have to do it, and the relationship points you get for that are huge. So that, for me, is how you build long-term relationships. There's a few other things, but that's one of the key ones. You can still do that remotely, but you need to be a bit more structured about it. You need to write down call it structured informality. Write down the people that you want to build relationships with, have an antenna on them, once a month check in. Have I built that relationship? Is that relationship stronger than it was last month? And if it isn't, why isn't it? And what can you do to make it better? What gets measured gets done. You have to check in on yourself, and you find proactive ways to be helpful.
Okay, so we're going to pivot slightly back to our CVs and our resumes and getting ready for an interview. So have you any tips for people who maybe haven't updated their CV in, 10 years? How do they start? How do they even begin to go back into it?
Yeah, so look, it can be a bit of a painful process when you haven't done it. So just to give the really annoying advice of don't wait 10 years to update your CV. Even if you're not looking for a job, you should be updating it, because you'll forget the good stuff that you did. And so you should have a fluid CV. You should be updating it every couple of months with the achievements you have. It's even just a nice little mental boost you get every couple of months as well, or a real danger sign flag that's really useful as well if you can't update it. So that's the first thing, which is annoying, I know, for anybody who wants an answer to the 10 years question. CVs, for the most part, the major issue that you find with them is their list of responsibilities or tasks rather than achievements, deliverables, and scale. So there are, I did this thing, but I've no idea if you did it well. I led out on this project. I'm like, oh, brilliant. It could have been a disaster. Rather than I delivered X project that led to. So you give me the achievement. So you need to think about your career, and you need to look at, what are my day-to-day responsibilities? What are my day-to-day tasks? Get them down, and then ask yourself, how can I prove I did this well? Or how can I prove I did this at a serious level? So a serious level is scale. It's figures you put on it. It's timelines you put on it. It's numbers of staff, etc. Achievement is successfully delivered rather than tasked to deliver. And how do you prove you delivered it successfully? So you need to get those achievements down. If you can't think of them, you ask people. You ask people, what do you remember I've done over the last number of years? What project? Because sometimes people external to you have a better view on the good stuff you've done, because good people sometimes do a job, get it done, move on, and forget it ever happened, particularly if it was awkward. Yeah. So sometimes asking other people. The other thing as well, just on the achievement, sometimes the outcome might be basic, delivered on time, but if it was done in a challenging circumstance, it's still an achievement. You just need to get the challenge across on paper. So if the outcome was I delivered on target every month for 2 years, but if that was done in the circumstances where manpower was down by 30% unexpectedly for 6 months, then it's delivered to target, even though we're down 30% and So you work out how do I put it in context as well. And so it should be a fact sheet of your achievements. The other thing you need in your CV is there has to be a profile up at the top that mirrors the job you're applying for. So if you read the spec for the job you're applying for, and they say that they're looking for somebody who has 8 years experience, in product management, exceptional organizational skills, strong communication skills, and a pre-existing network in the field, you need a profile summary that gives you 4 or 5 bullet points and proves each one of them up top. Not just says he has it, but proves it. Exceptional organization skills, as evidenced by leading out on 4 major projects over the last 2 years to a high standard, so that they can just, in the 30 seconds they'll spend looking at your CV, go tick, 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 you're worth talking to. So that's what you need to do for the CV.
If anything, it'll just show that you're prepared and you're putting in a bit of work before the interview.
Absolutely. And you care about the job.
Yeah.
So like it's this idea, it's like any human interaction, like you need to show you care about the other person, that you've thought about the other person, that you're not just going up to absolutely everybody you see and saying, geez, I'm great, look at me. That you're actually thinking, no, you're the one I identified. You're the one that I want to chat to. So it's kind of common politeness anyway, but it's very rarely done actually. And it's very rarely done well.
So I instead of putting it on the CV, I put it on the CV as well, but I keep it on my LinkedIn. That's where I track my previous roles, and I just have them all saved on there, so that either I don't lose the document that I'm the Word doc that I put my CV into, or I have a few different versions, and I might not have the most latest one. So LinkedIn is a pretty good place for me, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I think that's smart, and it's clever, and it keeps it updated. I suppose the only thing is, something that and a Google Doc for the things you don't want to put up on LinkedIn. You don't always want everything up.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and that's the same for, you shouldn't have like your leaving cert scores and stuff like that in your CV.
No. What's relevant to the job you're applying for? Like that's like, there is an element I've had people, they leave their primary school on because they thought their primary school was in a good area, like there is that element of it, and it just whip it out. It's irrelevant. We can, if it's not a minimum qualification for what you're looking for, and there's something else that's superseded at this stage, look, there might not be, but if there was, get rid of it. You don't need it there. And people have a tendency to feel like, well, I need to put in everything I've ever done. And it just wastes space on the page as well. Look at the job, what's relevant to the job, and include that. And then if you need to put additional experience to tick off the timeline, you can put that in a small little box. But don't be giving me your responsibilities for every single role you've had, even if you're only there for 4 months, like it's irrelevant. If it's relevant to the gig, include it. There's no rule to this. It's just tailor it to the gig and tailor it to the job and the person.
So moving on from, you've your CV prepared, you've been accepted for an interview. What probably over the next year is going to be maybe a Zoom interview with for the company. How do you prepare yourself for the interview itself, for the company you're going to interview?
A whole host of things that you can do. Sure, we'll go through them.
Yeah.
You look at the spec, you think about the job. That's where you start, right? You start by saying, hang on, what do they need me to be able to do? Go through it. What are the 4, 5, 6 major things jumping out at me here of the skill sets, be they kind of technical expertise and coding, etc., be they communication skills, be they leadership of a team? What do they actually need me to be able to do? You get all of that down. And then you work out, how can I proactively and clearly prove to them that I can do those 6 or 7 things? That's all an interview is. They need you to fulfill a role and deliver at something. You need to prove you've done it loads of times. Here's a one specific time with a great outcome. You tell them the story. You've done a podcast and storytelling. So if they listen to that, they'll know how to tell a story. That's what you do in interviewing. I've done it loads of times. Here's a story of when I did it well in challenging circumstances. I can do it again. And that's the majority of an interview. So most people waste a huge amount of time in their preparation by reading and reading and reading and reading and reading reams and reams of stuff, and then maybe moving on to writing or thinking through loads of answers in their head. And that's fine. You need to do a bit of research. That's fine. But the key thing is there are 6 or 7 things they need. What is your answer to those 6 or 7 things? And the structure is simple. I've loads of experience. Here's a story of when I did it really well. Here's how I do it every time, or here's how I do it again. So that's one of the things you need to do to prepare. Second thing is have your story. A lot of interviews are going to start with it. Go on, catch us up on your career. Tell us about your talk through your CV. Tell us about yourself. Most people wing that question, and I cannot understand why they wing that question. You start that, you get that right, you nail it in 2 minutes, you fill it with your achievements, you start with your current role, and you make it clear that your story, your career has been built into this opportunity. So you bring me through your career, start with the relevant recent stuff, fill it with achievements. I don't care what you did, I cared what you delivered, what you achieved. And then at the end, make it clear that your story has built for this role. At this stage of my career, I feel like I've developed the management experience. I definitely have proven I have the technical expertise, and I'm ready now to add value at a senior level, which is what this brings. So you make it clear that you've been building to this opportunity. So the key things they're looking for, how do you prove you have them? That opening salvo, that opening question. The third key thing, there's loads, but the third key one, if I had to nail it down to 3, and I will so that I'll stop speaking, practice out loud. I cannot for the life of me ever understand why people do not practice out loud for a verbal interaction, which is what an interview is. Think it through in their head, write it down. Almost completely a waste of time. You have to talk out loud to prepare for any interview. You know what you're going to be saying. You know the story you want to tell. You know the examples you want to use. Get them ready. Have a muscle memory in the spoken word ready to deliver. You have to practice out loud. There's no other behavior that people practice for by not doing the thing that it involves. If you're practicing your golf swing, you don't think it through in your head 25 times and then hope on the day you'll nail it. If you're practicing, kicking a conversion, you don't talk it out consistently in your head or write it down and then hope you'll be able to nail it. You learn how to dance. You just start dancing and you work it out, and you tailor it that way. It's the exact same for an interview. Yeah, if you're prepping for an interview and you haven't spoken in more than an hour, you're wasting your time.
Yeah. And there was a couple of ones that I've heard you in a previous podcast where just ones that might be useful. The laptop, putting it up on a couple of books.
Yeah, which I haven't done here. So I should have asked you that. I don't know if you're recording the screen or if you were just doing the audio. So I wasn't set up. Yeah. So, I mean, it's relatively simple. If you're doing an interview, don't do what I'm doing here and where there's a tilt up and where there's stuff in the background. You get it up on a number of books so that you're at eye level and there's no tilt. All right. So the amount of people I've had who are going for interviews and they're still, that it's totally like that, or it's like that, or you need to have it centered like that, as if you're a news reader, like a contributor onto the 6-1 News. They'll be set up, here up, bit of space, direct on. That's what you're looking for. So there's no tilt and there's no angle. I've had people who've come and they're holding their phone. They're saying, yeah, I was going to do an interview like this. Mad stuff. If you only have a phone, put it up on books, tier it, put it up on the book so your eye level is directly like that. So yeah, simple things like that for Zoom, absolutely essential, because somebody's going to do it right, and if you do it wrong, it's just not going to work well for you.
Yeah, use headphones, that kind of thing. Have a proper test it out beforehand as well.
Use headphones to see if it works. Run through it yourself the day before. Do a test call on the platform that you're going to be using. Make sure the laptop is all right. Make sure the audio on the laptop is okay. One of the things that if I was doing an interview, I wouldn't use this laptop. And so if I'm ever doing talks, I use another one, or I use my phone actually, and just mic it up, because the webcam on this for me isn't good enough. If you're going in to do an interview, the webcams on the Macs just aren't at the top level. They will be, I guarantee you, in the next iteration, but they're not at the moment. So it's things like that. It's polished professional image that you're putting forward. Yeah. The opposite of what I'm doing here for you, John.
Thanks. So what just kind of these questions, what kind of traits should you display in an interview? Does it matter if you have the skills?
Tricks or traits?
Traits.
Tricks. I was going to push back on the use of the term. What are they looking for in the spec? Like, that's like the traits you show are the ones that they have said that they're looking for. So if they've mentioned in 3 different ways, we need you to be able to build relationships with people. Cross-functional communication, strong communication skills, stakeholder building skills. That's different ways of saying, geez, we need you to be able to build relationships to make sure that people like you and that you can engage with them. Well, then that's where your focus should be. So you have to base it on the spec or from conversations you've had in the lead up to it, for what traits they're looking for. And your job is to prove that you've delivered on those traits in the past. I would think a lot of the time, I'm going to go a little bit of a ramble on this, but interviewers sometimes have a bias towards likability. and communication skills, so that people like to trust their gut, and so they'll have a genuine thing of that they won't want it. They'll have a competency framework, but in the back of their mind they'll say, look, I just like him for some reason, so therefore he must be good at the job. Now, when I train interviewers, that's the first thing I deal with. Likability is irrelevant if it's not key to the role. If getting on with people and building relationships is not the number one thing in this role, it should not be the number one thing in your mind as an interviewer. So you need to get over that unconscious bias that you have. But as a candidate, there's an element of you need to realize that exists. And so that practice and polish in your delivery of your answers to make them conversational, to be so prepared it looks like you're not prepared, is relatively important. I don't think it should be all the time, but we live in the real world. It is. And that's verbal prep as well.
Cool. And so look, one last point before we finish. Is there anything else that you'd like to say that we haven't covered so far for anyone who might be struggling to find a job at the moment or trying to find the right path for themselves?
Yeah, I suppose there's two things, and we'll take it for two different people. For people who are struggling to find a job and wanting one soon, and so they might have lost a job during COVID maybe, or they feel they're in a rut and want to move on. Looking for a job is a job in and of itself. It's not an ad hoc activity. It's something you have to devote structured time to. So whether it's 3 hours of an evening, 3 times a week, or whatever it is, you have to be structured in how you look and say, look, I look for jobs in this day. I'll write CVs and cover letters this day. I'll practice this day. It's a structured, focused thing. Otherwise you get aimless, and it can be very, very disheartening. So you have to be structured in what you do. If you're in a role and you're looking for your next step, you're thinking where you want to be. You have to think about what you want your and it is, for want of a better term, brand to be. What words do you want associated with you? How are you seen internally, and how would you like to be seen internally? Because what I find a lot of time with people is they can have an exceptionally strong brand with their manager. They see them as hardworking, brilliant track record, strong right hand, gets everything done on time. But that they reached a point in their career where the next step is a little bit more strategic, or it needs a bit more inspirational communication skills, or needs something else. And that brand then is no good to them. And they come up against this wall that they're at the next step, that leap into seniority, and they actually haven't been working at developing the next level of skill and brand that they need, because they've been getting brilliant feedback. They've been doing a great job. They've been delivering on target, but they take the eye off the next step of saying, hang on, actually, in a year's time, I'm going to need to be in an interview, proving I can kick on to the next level, proving I can be strategic, proving I can lead. And they haven't looked for opportunities now, which means they'll get to the interview, they'll get the feedback, and they're a year or two behind. So you need to think of not what traits and skills do I need associated to be brilliant at my current job, but what do I need to be associated with me to be brilliant at my current job and get me ready for the next gig. So they'd be my two things on that I haven't said.
Perfect. Thanks, Lorcan. We're going to leave it at that. Thanks for coming on the show.
No problem. Delighted.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you found that this has helped you in any way and might help someone else, it'd be great if you could like, subscribe and share it on any of the social medias you're involved on. We do have a website at youngleaders.tech where you can find links to all of our social media accounts. There you can also listen back to other podcasts, meetup recordings, and have a look at our reading list, where we have a list of books, podcasts and blogs that have been recommended by our speakers. I'm always looking for new speakers as well, so there's a contact form on the website where you can send speaker recommendations if you know of anyone that would be suitable. Again, thanks for listening, and I hope you come back to the next episode.